Welcome everybody to the first episode of the Dharma Warrior podcast. I'm delighted to have my friend and colleague Kalavati Devi, or Dr. Christie Smirl, whichever you would like to call her, here with me today for the first episode. I couldn't think of a better guest to have as the first guest. Kalavati recently contributed our first guest blog article on the DharmaWarrior.net blog, which was titled Yoga, Life Transformation Beyond Fitness. And so we just wanted to get together and have a little discussion on the same topic, and I'm delighted that you could do this on short notice. We had planned on doing it this coming Friday, but I've been on a waiting list for oral surgery, and so I'm going to be a toothless mess from this Thursday onward for a little while. So I'm happy that you were able to meet with me today, and we can do this before I enter my period of reclusion.
Thank you for.
So yeah, it's been great getting to know you through this collaboration, and it's an honor to have you here today. So we're going to talk about yoga, life transformation beyond fitness. And we spoke for a couple minutes last night, or more than a couple minutes, I guess, and just about the same subject and what we wanted to discuss. And last night was a special holiday, Janmashtami, which is celebrating the birth of Krishna. So we were delighted to get together last night, and it is also another holiday celebrating the emanation of Kali, or Mahakali Jayanti. So it's a very auspicious time for us to get together in both of our traditions as well. So it's great to be here. Did you have anything that you wanted to say off the bat? I was going to do just a little introduction and talk just about where you're coming from and what you're bringing to the discussion, and a little brief biography.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me on. I look forward to the discussion and look forward to more.
Great, I really look forward to it as well. So Kalavati Devi, or Dr. Christie Smirl, has a doctorate in Ayurveda from the American University of Complementary Medicine. She is a nurse practitioner and Master of Science from the Loma Linda University, an Ayurveda and yoga educator at Southern California University of Health Sciences, an advanced yoga teacher trainer with a E-RYT 500 certification, or 500-hour certification, and Param Divya Adishakti Sant Mat devotee and Parashak. And Prasharak, sorry. Also a devotional musician and artist. Would you like to maybe just expand on that? It's your resume. You can maybe explain a little better than me your background and where you're coming from with your yoga practice.
Yeah, thank you for that introduction. You know, yoga has been really an important developmental place for me in my life. I didn't start formally practicing yoga till I was about 30 years old. And at that time I had really reached like this peak in my medical career, and I had finished all my college studies, and I had a daughter, and everything was, oh wow, you know. But I felt very emotionally and spiritually bankrupt. And when I started finding the practice of yoga, it completely changed my whole aspect on life and my life trajectory. So it's really become my primary devotion in life. And I've since taken sabbatical from the hospital, and I'm really focusing more so on my spiritual development. So I think I've been able to see kind of both sides of the road. And like I say, oftentimes that medicine, the way it's currently being practiced in some models, is what I call the ambulance at the bottom of the cliff. And to truly find wellness, was that big key to find that prevention and that true as we call it, holistic medicine, which Western medicine is dramatically lacking. But then in addition to that, to really incorporate in the yoga and the spirituality has made the world of a difference to me and a lot of my students.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for sharing that. And when we spoke last night, I said to you that I felt that this is a great subject for the first guest blog post and the first podcast for DharmaWarrior.net. And I was incredibly excited about that. And we started talking about where we were, or our backgrounds in yoga. And I said that I felt like I was coming to it with more of a spiritual background than a lot of people in the modern day. And I had sort of made the assumption that you were as well. And you sort of corrected me. Like, no, you just sort of told me a funny story about one of your first classes that you went there, and you had sort of had one expectation, but then you found yourself sort of sniveling on the mat by the end of the class.
Yeah, for me, I first started taking, traditional yoga classes, or I should say formal yoga classes. I often giggle and say I didn't go there for the spirituality. I didn't realize yoga was a form of spirituality. For me, I just wanted to go and, have a good fit body. Of course, I thought it was all about fitness, as most of our Western culture, not most, but much of our Western culture misunderstands. And, the poses weren't that difficult because I was young and fit. And at that time, I found each time I would lay down on the mat at the end of the class, and she would say, okay, now begin to breathe and begin to clear your mind. And every class I ended up crying on the mat. And I thought, this isn't what I signed up for. I didn't sign up for psychological healing, I signed up for a fitness class. And I very quickly, within a few weeks, realized that yoga was much, much more than a form of fitness. And it was a way to completely transform your way of life that a lot of people in the Western world are never exposed to.
Mm-hmm. And I'm sure a lot of people come to a similar sort of experience when they start practicing yoga as well, that they would come to it for the physical benefits and start to realize that it has a lot of other benefits, even if you are only practicing the postures and breath work like most modern yoga classes. And so...
Yeah, absolutely. When I do a yoga teacher training, it's not until about the third month of yoga teacher training that the students learn asana. And they might go through anywhere from 20 to 40 different full-day intensives, and only about 1/5 to 1/6 of those classes include asanas. And sometimes they'll ask me, aren't we going to take more yoga poses kinds of class? Because that's what I'm going to be teaching in the community. And I'll say, by the end of the program, you should know that asana is only a small fraction. The physical body practice is only a drop of what yoga is. We often see that analogy of, this yoga pose up on top of the surface, but then underneath are all the roots. And that's where the magic happens, in doing all the other portions of yoga, not just the poses.
And when we spoke yesterday, we talked about the 8 pillars of yoga, as you mentioned them in the article, and how before you reach postures or asanas, which are the third of 8 limbs, you have the yamas, or the 5 abstinences, and the niyamas, or 5 observances. And would you say that those are placed first and foremost within the 8 limbs because they are important? Or we certainly, I guess, discussed that the topic last night, or the idea that the yamas and niyamas are sort of there to set you up for success, so that when you sit down to meditate, or when you sit down to do yoga, that you don't have all of these things that you've been doing or not doing in your life that are eating away at you, and you close your eyes when you try to calm your mind.
You know, I think Patanjali put them in that order. But when we read things like the Bhagavad Gita, they're not necessarily separate or exclusive. We want to make sure that when we fully understand yoga, that we're looking at it as an entirety, and that all the limbs are interdependent upon each other. But I do believe, you know, when I do teacher training program, I always start off with the fundamental principles, and we study deeply the yamas and niyamas, because when we take a look at what is our human project, you know, why are we here? Why are we born? What is the goal of this human incarnation that we're in? And if we bypass and skip the yamas and niyamas, we often are just kind of spinning in an unusual direction. And like we talked about yesterday, it's often very difficult to get down to the core of truly knowing yourself if you've skipped the yamas and niyamas in this particular 8-limb approach. Yeah, and we can go into them even more detail.
Perfect. So I guess that just brought to mind one quote that I wrote down from the article where you said, ultimately the journey of yoga leads the seeker to Samadhi, soul integration and union with the infinite source of creation. So it just brought to mind when we were speaking last night, or how I was saying that we talked about how the yamas and niyamas are sort of there to set you up for success, or so that you're not living a life that is in disharmony with your yogic practice, because it doesn't make a lot of sense to sort of be avoiding the fundamental aspects, but then looking to your meditation practice or looking to your spiritual practice to help you get your life together from a top down kind of perspective, right? When there's a lot of things that you could be doing on a base level just to sort of take care of those fundamental things to begin with. And then when you sit down to your spiritual practice or to your yogic practice, that has already been, you're not trying to depend on, you're not coming to your spiritual practice to try to clean up the things that should be cleaned up in your life already.
You know, that's a hard thing for some people to understand, that if we bypass things like the yamas and niyamas, when we sit down to do our meditation, you know, I like the analogy of we're a mirror. And whatever we are processing inside, what is unresolved inside, what our mental disturbances or vitiations are, when we sit down to meditate, that's oftentimes what gets mirrored right back at us. And so people will say, I don't know, I just can't meditate. I have a very difficult time with it. And I always encourage them, go back to your yamas and niyamas and see, are you practicing these things that help facilitate the entire process? You know, if we're going to try to take into consideration the fact that yoga, in some definitions, we say it means to yoke. Yoke with what? Yoke with your soul, yoke with the infinite. And if we are sitting here constricted and in conflict, that is an obstacle. That's a limitation. So the meditation, the concentration, the self-actualization process is going to be very difficult until self-study has been done extensively.
That totally makes sense. So I guess we've sort of talked about the yamas and niyamas generally. Do you want to get into maybe talking about a few of them specifically, and I can just read through what you had to say in the article, and then we can expand upon it from there?
Sure, that'd be great.
So here we are. Yamas. An initial tenet of yoga is self-examination and cultivation of an honorable life path. The first limb of yoga outlines 5 yamas. Yamas are abstentations or behaviors promote personal development. The 5 yamas are ahimsa, satya, brahmacharya, asteya, and aparigraha. Ahimsa is the principle of nonviolence. This concept can be extended to include avoidance of physical violence, killing, violent actions towards self and others, gossip, and even thoughts of hate or dislike. Ahimsa encourages us to live in harmony and respect divinity in everything. The second yama is satya. Or I guess maybe we should stop there and talk about ahimsa for a minute.
Yeah, you know, ahimsa is a really important concept. If we take into consideration the fact that yoga means to try to yoke with your soul or yoke with infinite source, but we have conflict inside of anger, or we have violent tendencies inside, we have to realize also that that anger and violent tendencies is going to be mirrored back to us when we try to yoke, and that it's a limitation in the sense that, let's say I see an animal. When we really begin advanced yoking, we understand that that animal is also divine. So how am I to take its life without acknowledging that it's divine? And there becomes conflict within us. If I'm going to go out and be hateful and hurtful to other people, or even to myself through speech, thought, or action, I'm actually committing that himsa, because ahimsa is nonviolence. I'm committing that himsa towards divinity. And when I go deep into meditation, is this what's going to reflect back at me? We want to eradicate as much of himsa from us as possible. Of course, you know, then some students will say, well, what about self-defense, etc.? I'll say, well, you know, that's your personal path. Yeah, it doesn't mean be a doormat either.
Yeah, and that is something that is, for me, coming from a sort of warrior path, being involved in martial arts from a young age, and that I've always contemplated, and that's another thing that we, I guess, spoke about yesterday as well, that we were speaking about the Bhagavad Gita and the fact that it takes place in a battlefield and not in your typical setting for a sacred text, where you might expect the dialogue between Krishna, incarnation of the divine, and Arjuna, who is a warrior. And so I myself took a lot of inspiration from the Gita upon reading it, in that it sort of puts in perspective that not all of our battles are necessarily in the physical world, and that the most important battles most often happen in an internal battlefield. And you had sort of some interesting things to say about that as well.
Yeah, well, I think it's really important for us to understand that the yamas, the niyamas, the different limbs of yoga are really a way to create self-mastery. And when we say, you know, to stand up and fight, to go into that battleground of life, it's not about going out and killing people or being violent. It's about the challenges, the suffering that we have through life. And even if you look at certain translations of the Bhagavad Gita, you know, in chapter 1, there's all these extensive names of the king, name of the prince, name of the sons, etc., etc., etc. And if you look at one of the translations, my favorite translation, you can see that these names translated properly are actually showing us that it's an internal battle as well, that we're working against the ego affliction, that we're working, you know, towards dharmic lifestyle, that we're, you know, dealing with our actions and our karmas, but it's reflecting an inner battlefield. And, you know, that comes back around to people will say about, fighting. And I'll say that, martial arts training is not about picking a fight. It's about being competent to end a fight. And really, if we look at the 8 limbs of yoga, we're trying to end the fighting within ourselves and come into that peacefulness, that still surface of the lake, where we're giving a beautiful, true reflection of the soul's light. Because the soul is not stained, the soul is not imperfect. It's us, our perception, our actions or non-actions that are creating the ripples, clouding the reflection of the soul's beauty. So, I tell people, yoga is not always easy. It can be a big battle inside.
No, it's beautiful. Thank you. So I guess I'll move on to the next one of the yamas being, I believe, Asteya. Just 1 second. I was wrong. It is Satya. So the second yama is Satya, truthfulness, not telling lies to others or self. Satya encourages keeping your word and aligning actions with words and thoughts. Living a life full of lies can create disturbances deep in the psyche, drawing us further from self-actualization. Did you have anything you wanted to say to expand on that?
Yeah, Satya is very important. At the end of the day, when you close your eyes and go to sleep, you know if you're living a truthful life. You know if you've told the truth in the day. You know if you've had truth in words, truth in thought, truth in action. Unless you're delusional, then you may not know the difference, but that's another story. And at the end of the day, if we have all of these non-truths existing within us, then we're conflicted. We know that we're not living that straightforward path. And it's not about being perfect. It's about not having the disturbances in us. And when we're doing things like lying to others or to ourselves, we're not able to establish that direct knowledge that we are actually walking our path. So it can be difficult. My Guru Maharaj always says, don't lie to people. Just tell them the truth, even if they don't like it. And I think that sometimes in this society, we're too afraid that people will judge us, reject us, marginalize us. And so we kind of create this flowery story of the truth. But at the end of the day, we know that that's not true. And that can cause a lot of mental disturbances within the person. So I always say it's the best policy, just go ahead and say it. And sometimes you don't say it to everybody. You have to know when to speak and when not to speak also.
Mm-hmm. I've taken a lot of inspiration from Guru Sri M, and he says the same thing, just simply stick to the truth, that there is plenty of people out there selling falsehood and lies, right? So it's incredibly honorable path in the modern day just to stay oriented towards truth and to not be swayed by just the simpleness of falsehood. Sometimes, as you were saying, that sometimes it's easier just to sort of tell someone what they'd like to hear and get through a simple social interaction or get through your day a little easier. But when you go to close your eyes at night, you know the times when you were true to yourself and the times that you weren't. And there is something virtuous or something to be said about being able to stay the course and to keep what is important and what is true to you in sight on your path.
Yeah, and it's really about finding your own internal personal truth. And what is that? You know, why did you come here? What is your passion? Can you live out the truth of your life? It can be very difficult for people. And when we're not living out the truth of our life, it shows on the inside. It shows on the outside, depending on, you know, how much you allow to show. But the closer in alignment you come with your truth, and you speak your truth, and you act your truth, then there's more self-actualization, because that's what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to know ourselves and fulfill that, as long as we're not harming somebody else. That's why first we have ahimsa. So as long as we're not oppressing somebody else or harming somebody else or something else, then we need to live our truth.
And it can be easy in the modern day to live a life where we don't really find any reason to look deep within or to confront our deeper problems. Or I'm sure that there are a lot of people that when they come to yoga, like you were saying you did, that you were expecting to go to a fitness class, and then once you try to calm your mind a little bit, you start realizing that there's some things that are eating away at you, or that there's some things within you that are unfulfilled or unacknowledged. And for a lot of people, I guess transformation isn't going to be easy and isn't going to be quick or simple. It's going to involve a lot of sort of dirty aspects of soul searching and acknowledging things that you swept under the rug and skeletons that you've kept in the closet often for your whole life. And these things become part of us and remain part of us, whether we're acknowledging them or not. And yoga can allow us to, or give us the tools to confront a lot of aspects of ourselves that we may be ill prepared to do without those tools. Like as I was saying yesterday, that I've had a lot of health struggles, both mental and physical, and that yoga really gave me the tools that I needed to navigate those struggles, and the strength to look within and to acknowledge the aspects that needed to be brought to light and needed to be transformed. And that is always going to be a sort of process of unraveling, and it's something that I feel like a lot of people could really benefit from in the modern day. And so that's why I was really happy to have you contribute this article. And I feel that a lot of people could benefit from finding their own personal truth and pursuing it.
It's really important, really important. You know, and then when we look at the third limb of yoga, you know, we have to be really truthful with where we're placing our sense organs and incorporate the previous ahimsa into it. You know, in Ayurveda, we learn about the five sense organs and how they all relate to different elements. And we learn about how each sense organ has an appropriate use, how it can cause disease if we underuse a sense organ, and how it can cause disease, either physical or mental, if we overuse it or abnormally use it. So again, we're coming back to the truth of how are we living our lives, and are we even being violent, quote unquote, to our own sensory system, to our sense of touch, to our sense of feel. And are we using our five sense organs to find the beauty and divinity in life, or are we clogging them and causing all sorts of mental vitiations with, you know, excessive TV watching, or soaking in the violence off of TV, or, you know, just even simple things like sensuality. Are we using our sexuality and sensuality appropriately? Or are we indulging to the point of ahimsa upon ourselves and our path? Is it diluting us from our truth and satya? So I really try to interplay them all in my daily life and ask myself, okay, how close are you getting? You know, how close are you?
Sense. Perhaps we can move on to the next Niyama. The next Yama, I meant to say. So the third Yama, Brahmacharya, is touching on what you were just speaking of the power of sexuality and the senses. And so the third Yama, Brahmacharya, is mastery of the senses. Control over the senses allows retention and balanced utilization of prana, ojas, and vitality. Did you have anything else that you wanted to say about that subject, Valerie?
Yeah, a lot of times in different writings or different yoga teacher trainings, depending on the lineage or the origin of the training, a lot of people understand Brahmacharya as a type of celibacy and a restriction from sensuality or sexuality or just sex, period. And I can understand that, because in Ayurveda, they do talk about the fact that if you have too much sexual discharge, that you lose your ojas, because we know that the dhatus, the 7 layers of the body, as they call them in Ayurveda dhatus, we've got rasa, rakta, mamsa, meda, asti, maja, sukra. So we've got all the way from plasma down to the reproductive system, or the ojas, that thing that causes us to have this beautiful tejas and just oozing with life, right? And if we have too much sexual interaction, then we have a drain of the ojas, and we sometimes start losing that tejas, that vitality, that, what is it about that person that makes them just sparkle? It's because they have vitality. But at the same time, we want to make sure that we're using those senses in a way to reflect back to divinity what we're enjoying. So I don't always just say, it's about celibacy. It's about using your passion, your senses, a sense of smell, to pick up a flower and just go, oh my gosh, that is the best smelling flower I've smelled all day or all my life. And what do we do with it? We're sending this kama, this enjoyment, as a form of divinity. When we sit and we eat our food, have we offered it first to divinity? Or are we just sitting there, stuffing our gullet, eating all sorts of things that taste mindless, McDonald's, etc.? Or are we sitting down and engaging all of our senses in our meal, touching our food, tasting the food, hearing the crunch of the food, smelling the aroma of the food? And that's when we start coming to life. So, some people think that Brahmacharya means restricting your senses. I say it's mastery of your senses so that you're optimally enjoying life and creating this divine interaction between your physical world and that divinity within yourself, rather than just being all humdrum, boring, and stuffed up tight.
No, that makes total sense to me, and thank you for sharing that perspective. I think that is a concept that people sort of have a sort of one-sided view upon, or certainly when a lot of people hear the word Brahmacharya, they think of celibacy or abstinence, or at least a sort of control, rather than what you were saying, which is a sort of controlled experience through the senses, or using the senses as a tool to have a more engaged experience with our environment.
Yeah, and there's a lot of lineages or religions that really kind of push that celibacy, and we see what that leads to. There's all sorts of controversy, and I'm sure somebody will vehemently disagree with me. That's okay. Some of this is also going to be how I've come to understand yoga, not necessarily what was written in one book or another book. So,
yeah, the lonely road and the path of celibacy certainly is not for everyone, and without naming any specific traditions, it's become sort of evident within certain religious groups that it can certainly manifest in some kind of horrible ways, obviously. And so,
and for some people, it is a good pathway. That's maybe the pathway that they want to live or am happy living. But I don't think that it should be one size fits all either when it comes to that particular philosophy of yoga.
I personally have taken periods of time where I said to myself that I needed to step back from engaging in romantic relationships just to sort of allow myself that time and space to take control of my sexuality or romantic self again, in a way, because I found that particularly in my youth, I was dependent upon relationships, or I found that I was constantly trying to fill some hole in my soul with another person, and then as soon as a relationship wouldn't work out, I found myself wanting to find another one, or looking again, and as I grew older, I caught myself in that, and it forced me to ask myself what it was that I was looking to fulfill in myself, and why I felt like that was something that had to come from an external source or from another person, and how. And then it forces you to think about, if I'm looking to fulfill some aspect of myself from another person, then I've already acknowledged that I have some sort of unfulfilled desire or unfulfilled aspect within myself that I really should acknowledge prior to offering myself in that way to another person as well. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's a couple different things along those lines that you remind me of. Is when we look at our sense organs, are we being controlled by an abnormal attachment through our sense organs? Things like overeating. That is showing a lack of mastery over that sense organ of taste and eating, that action of eating that comes along with that sense organ. Or when we take a look at sensuality or sexuality, if it's leading us in an abnormal direction or away from our dharma and our spiritual path, then we need to gain control over it. And it reminds me of this saying I once heard, and I'll probably paraphrase it, perhaps not quite the same way, but this woman stood up and she said, and I've heard it since, one day I looked at myself and I realized I had a hole right in the center of my being, of my core. And I realized it wasn't a food-shaped hole. It wasn't a shopping-shaped hole. It wasn't a sex-shaped hole. It wasn't a drug-shaped hole. It was a God-shaped hole. And she had to really work, like we advocate in yoga, to master your senses and make sure that you're not being led astray through the, mindless seeking of things that are taking you off of your dharmic path. And some people, it may require celibacy or may involve celibacy, and other people, that might be completely the opposite.
Okay, so perhaps we can move on from Brahmacharya. I think we've probably covered that subject. Let me see here. The next Yama, the fourth Yama, Asteya, discourages stealing or encourages non-theft. So, what would you like to say about that?
I think that when we look at these yamas, we're looking at just some core fundamental things like don't be a creep. you know, don't take stuff from people. When we take things without permission, we're in a way creating a type of violence. You know, even when we oppress people, oppression sometimes comes in the form of stealing from them, or stealing their opportunity, or stealing their birthright, or stealing their identity, stealing their ideas without giving credit. And, you know, when we look at all the different religions, most of them, I believe, say, don't steal, because it's just not nice. And at the end of the day, you know it wasn't yours. You know you took it unfairly. And again, that causes, for some people, disturbance. Some people don't have a disturbance with that. You know, and that leads us right along the same line with the fifth yama of apigraha, of not being covetous of things that don't belong to you. You know, so when it ties into one of the niyamas too, of santosha, being content. But when we're not content, when we're not creating our own peace and stability, then we tend to want to take from other people. Oh, but that will make me happy. That thing that they have will make me feel better. That thing that they have, I want to covet and take as mine. And again, that comes into truthfulness, and it comes into the ahimsa standpoint of not taking, stealing what doesn't belong to you. Yeah.
And
A lot of times I say that the yamas are, don't be a creep to yourself and to others.
mm-hmm. And there's one thing that came to mind when we were talking about Brown that I should mention before we move on, and that was just that it came to mind that with the yamas and niyamas, that a lot of the time it is encouraging you not to sort of indulge too much in a good thing. That it's showing you that even things, as you were saying earlier when we were talking about himsa and ahimsa, that often something that would be considered good, like food or exercise or something that is ultimately meant to benefit us, and can be taken to a limit where it becomes violence against the self. And that can be said of so many aspects of our life, that people will latch on to something that feels like a easy source of happiness or joy, whether that is an addiction or a person, place, thing, anything. You know, there are so many ways that people look for those easy, quick fixes and quick sources of a high or a rush, and it we sort of take for granted that the things that bring the true joy and the true meaning in life often aren't so simply obtained, and that there is a reason that, you know, something like that.
Well, and if we're not able to establish that consistency of acknowledging how we use our sense organs, we're much likely to have more difficulty when we get down to pratyahara and withdrawal of the senses. If we're always just sending our senses outward, I want all this, how are we even going to get into meditation? Because we're not going to be able to master the art of pratyahara and withdrawing all the senses to go deep into meditation. Then the monkey mind won't be controlled, because it'll always be wanting.
That did come to mind earlier, and I was going to mention it when we got down to pratyahara, and when it comes to withdrawal of the senses, because you were saying earlier that we can create such a more meaningful engagement with our world and with our experience or environment, however you want to phrase it, through Brahmacharya and through engagement of our sensory perceptions, but that it's important to develop that in a healthy and controlled fashion.
Yeah, and to use our senses for divinity. You know, to see what's divine, to smell what's divine, to taste what's divine, not just gluttony and coveting and things of that nature. Because then there's never enough. We're never satisfied.
So, was there anything else that you wanted to say about the 5 yamas before we move on to the niyamas?
No, I think that's a pretty good summary for people to chew on already.
Yeah, I feel like we got into the concepts on a bit more deep of a level than I was anticipating, but in a good way. So, okay, let's move on to the 5 niyamas, or 5 observances. And just allow me to open the article here. Actually, before we do that, there is a quote from you here that finishes off the 5 abstentions. And I quote, "The world is full of shiny objects that beckon our sense organs deep into the veils and waves of chatter and sway. Further we stray from the soul's light rays." Kalavati Devi. And it's true, there are infinite shiny distractions out there that will call the mind towards them, and yoga is there to help us learn to cultivate that inner peace and inner knowing and inner truth, so that we can come to a more meaningful experience of self without feeling the need to constantly look for some sort of gratification or validation from others or the external world in general.
Absolutely. It's very important.
So niyamas, the second limb of yoga, lays out 5 niyamas. Niyamas are observances or behaviors that guide us towards self-actualization. The 5 niyamas are Saucha, Santosha, Tapas, Swadhyaya, and Ishwara Pranidhana. Pardon my pronunciation, not exactly
Sanskrit naughty.
master. Saucha translates as purity. Purity can include cleanliness of mind, body, speech, and surroundings. When mind, body, and life are cluttered, contaminated, or disorderly, it is more difficult to radiate soul purity. So, yeah, I feel like there's some interesting points to touch upon in there. Is there anything that you wanted to say off the bat on the subject of Saucha?
Yeah, Saucha is very important. You know, people will come to my teacher training program. They're like, I didn't know you were going to tell me to clean my house. It's like, yeah, we need to look at how are we keeping our environment. You know, if we look at the practice of Feng Shui, it's the practice of creating the flow of qi and prana around us. If we live in a rat's nest, chances are the mind is also looking a bit like that as well. But really, we want to look at just the fundamental flow of prana. How is the prana flowing around us? The environment that we place ourselves in will then also determine how much prana we have available to us. So, you know, I encourage people first, look at your environment. You know, do you have, everybody has like a little junk drawer sometimes, or one room that's kind of under construction. But if you look at your house as a whole, if you look at your, you know, space as a whole, if it's not in order, get it in order. And it may cause mental alleviations too. So, you know, a lot of times when people have cluttered houses and the energy is really unkept, we also see problems with, you know, entity problems. And people have sometimes a hard time realizing that. So I say, if your house is cluttered, start there, clean it up. Next thing, clean up your body. Clean the outside of your body, you know? Wash yourself up, become presentable. You can see even on social media, sometimes you'll see experiments where you'll see these really depressed, downtrodden, homeless people, and all they need is a bath and a haircut to, you know, bring their sense of self-worth up. Even when we see cases of clinical depression, a lot of times one of the symptoms is a negligence of self-grooming or self-cleanliness. So just becoming cleanly on the outside body can be a real invigorating, pranic-rich environment. But it goes beyond the outer body. You know, some people are more interested in, oh, you know, I look good and I present myself good. But what does the inner body look like? What do the dhatus and shotas look like? You know, how are the tissues maintained? Are they toxic on the inside? Are they having psychosomatic brain disorders or psychological problems arising from the uncleanliness within inside their body? So cleanliness to me doesn't always just mean, you know, put your things away or eat purely. It means that the insides are functioning well. You know, sometimes I'll make the analogy of if you eat the wrong foods for your constitutional makeup and you're constipated, that's kind of a clutter. Many times the thinking is also constipated. Or if you're eating things that are not congruent with proper bowel movements and you're constantly having diarrhea, is that causing diarrhea or some form of diarrhea of the mind? And these are important things for us to look at. You know, our internal body functions matter. Are we completely inactive and sluggish? When we look at Ayurveda, we understand that if we're really inactive or we're eating too much heavy guru foods like meats and cheeses and breads, sweets, that we become heavy, we become slow. That's not necessarily cleanly on the inside, because then we'll see a direct correlation into the mind, causing tamas and fogginess and slowness of the mind. How are we going to meditate and find self-actualization when we feel like a heavy sloth? We might look hot and look good and talk good, but the inside is not clean and pure. It's not flowing well. We want the body to be flowing well. We want the tissues to be flowing well. That way the mind can flow well. You know, even something so simple in Saucha is eating cleanly in order to follow the paths of the seasons. So, you know, that goes a little bit off topic, but the cleanliness is very important. Cleanliness of our mind, not only from the body, but cleanliness of our mind as far as psychology. What are we feeding our mind? What are we processing through our mind? Are we still processing trauma? That's clutter. We need to process that out. We need to dump it to crumpet and get it out. We need to speak about it. We need to tell the truth. We need to find a counselor. We need to get a confidant. We need to journal it, breathe it out, whatever it is that has to be done. You need to take the trash out. Or some people, a lot of times their mind cleanliness is a problem when they're sitting all day watching social media or the news, just sucking in all the negativity and all the control mechanisms. And at the end of the day, they wonder why they feel like garbage. They wonder why their blood pressure is up. They wonder why their heart rate is abnormal. They wonder why they're stressed out. It's because they're not digesting what they're taking into their mind. And that's really an important concept. In my opinion, fits in with Saucha, cleanliness. Clean up your environment, clean up your body, clean up your act, clean up your eating, clean up your thinking, clean up what you're ingesting. You know, are we ingesting tons of clutter into our home? Are we ingesting tons of clutter into our body? Ingesting tons of clutter into our minds? We got to clean that out.
You know, it makes total sense, and it just comes back to what we have been coming to time and time again, that these things are just meant to sort of steer you towards a yogic lifestyle, the 8 limbs of yoga. And cleanliness is such an important thing, just as far as you're saying, as it represents an internal cleanliness, or that it represents a respect for the relationship between our inner and outer world, and how those two things interplay and affect one another, and they can be they can be really revealing about one another. You can look at someone's environment and tell a lot about their inner world. So yeah.
And I also say with cleanliness, I'll just make one last comment there, is if you're attempting to manifest the maximum amount of your divinity through your life, self-actualization, soul realization, God realization, etc. If everything is dirty, thinking, body, tissues, mind, how are we going to reflect that out? You know, if we make that analogy that we're like stained glass windows, and it's the light from within that radiates the beauty of the stained glass. What if it's just covered with slop on the inside and the beauty doesn't come through? It's like putting blackout curtains on, or it comes through abnormally as well.
Yeah, if we're trying to use yoga as a sort of tool to turn our body and our mind into a temple for the divine or for the godly, it makes some sense to sweep the floor before you invite over, so to speak, or to get things cleaned up and have all of your things in order so that you're not fighting against yourself again. And as you were saying yesterday when we came to this subject, try to picture a Buddhist temple that's disorderly. It just doesn't make sense. It doesn't click in your head, because it would never be, because they say cleanliness is godliness, and I guess that is sort of what they're getting at, is that if you are organized inside and you've built your temple in the inner, that will reflect in your outer world in every way.
In an ideal world. And I always tell people, you don't have to be perfect all at once. Just keep working on it. Do a little bit more each day, bit by bit.
And that is important to remember too, that all of this is going to be an ongoing process for everybody, and that there isn't, so to speak, an end goal in yoga, although there sort of is. But in that union, or yoga is the end goal, but that even for the most enlightened master, there's still something to be learned, or there's still something to be applied. So there's no point at which I guess I'm just trying to say that it's a process of unraveling the self throughout life, and learning to be able to take a step back and to look at yourself from an objective perspective, and to be able to use that greater perspective to encourage transformation and self-actualization and union, or yoking with the divine.
Absolutely.
Okay, so where were we here? The second niyama, santosha, encompasses the concept. My neighbor's dog is barking.
My dogs will be next.
Mine were whining at the other side of the dog gate at the bottom of the stairs, but I think they've fallen asleep at this point. I don't ever lock them out of the room, but they would be fighting for your attention right now. So the second niyama, santosha, encompasses the concept of contentment and striving to be satisfied with life right now, while striving to improve. Contentment brings peace and stabilization of ideations, So, did you have anything that you wanted to say about that concept of being content or being happy with what you have?
I think santosha is such an important concept. When I have, let's say, a friend or a student who's really in a pinch or a bind, and they're like, well, I need this, I need that, this, I need that, I need this, I need that. I'll say, okay, well, I can clearly see that you're having some mental vitiations over this. And it's not something that can be fixed right now. Like, here you go, here's a pen, now you're content. Or here's an apple, now you're happy. Sometimes what we're striving for and what we want is long-term. You know, well, I'm not going to be happy until 2 years from now when I blah, 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 fill in the blank of XYZ. And I'll tell people, what are you actually grateful for? Make a list of 20 things that you absolutely would not want to lose today. Have you given gratitude? Are you content for the things that you have at this moment? Would you like to lose your home right now? Would you like to lose all the food in your fridge right now? Would you like to lose your car right now? Have you tried expressing contentment for the things that you have right now, instead of just give me, give me, give me what is not attainable right now? Because that creates this whole, you know, energetic dissatisfaction all the time. You know, and when I interact with a person, if they're constantly dissatisfied, they're not very inspiring to be around. You know, because you go, oh, hey, how are you today? And they're like, well, and then blah, 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 blah. You know, they have a ton of things that they're unhappy about or discontented about. Whereas if you find that contentment inside, you can still have dreams for wanting more, but you're not that sucking vortex of discontent. When we are discontented, we tend to also be energetically vampiric to other people. You know, we drain other people that we're around. But really what we're striving for is to find that daily contentment, that thank you. Thank you for my food. Thank you for my clothes. Thank you for the roof over my head. Thank you for the things I have. Thank you for my life. And then proceed forward, rather than each day waking up and not being at peace with how things are. Because also when we're in that state of discontentment, there's always ripples and waves and mental vitiations of negativity. And how are we going to sit and do meditation and find that true stillness and peace, that yoking, that bliss, that ananda, if we're constantly just griping?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I was once told a real beautiful analogy from Kadambari Ma in India. She said, you know, Lakshmi, right? So a lot of people know Lakshmi. She's the, you know, manifestation of wealth and abundance and prosperity. Well, if we don't honor Lakshmi, even if we don't know her name or anything like that, but if we don't honor that Lakshmi, that prosperity, that abundance, then what do we get? We get her opposite sister, Lakshmi. Because you could be as rich as you want to be and still be unhappy, still be discontent. Where has the bliss gone? Down the drain because of the discontentment.
Mm-hmm. And that is such a huge thing I found on my spiritual path, is just finding gratitude for the moment and just finding peace in day-to-day life and finding joy in the mundane, and just accepting the things that you can't control, and taking power over the things that you can, and that it's important to it's just absolutely important to appreciate all of the blessings that we have in the world, and to, you know, it sounds cliche, you hear all those things like count your blessings and have an attitude of gratitude and all this, but it's incredibly meaningful and important, because if you wake up in the morning and you're just every day you're setting off with this sort of negative woe is me mentality, and you're always just focusing on the things that you don't have, it doesn't matter what you have or how many things you obtain, it's never going to bring you to that place of appreciation for just a walk down the street in the sunny air and the little things that are just, I guess they're in the modern day, so many people are have become obsessed with this sort of American dream mentality, where it's like, I need the house and the car and the job and all of these things before I'm ever going to have contentment. But when you set out on with that mentality, you're just setting yourself up for failure from the get-go.
Yeah. Well, and I also tell people, if you're not going to be content until XYZ have been fulfilled, what if you die tomorrow? Oh, then you die discontented. Why not find some contentment now? You know, if you're waiting for this 5-year goal, only then will I really feel like I'm content. Well, what if you drop dead in an hour?
Mm-hmm. And that's just it, is that life is sweet, and sometimes life is short, and it I've found that I've come to a place in life where I've looked back and said, wow, or I guess everyone at some point in life probably looks back upon life and feels like they didn't spend their time and their resources well, or like they didn't take advantage of opportunities to the best in the best way that they could have, or but at the same time, I really try to live without regret, because I guess, of the butterfly effect or whatever you want to call it, that you never know like what tiny little difference or tiny little thing could have happened differently that would totally alter the course of your reality. And again, it comes down to looking for truth and acknowledging where you are in life and what's brought you there, and that some aspects of the things that bring us to where we are today are positive and some are negative, and you can sort of look at your current position with judgment or with fear, I guess, or you can look at yourself with love and stop for myself, yoga really taught me to stop expecting so much out of myself and out of a day, and to just be content with what I do have and with the moment, right? Like when we look at the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and you know, the most important things that we need in life, like oxygen and food and shelter and all of these things, we all have taken care of, and we're sort of focused on these higher needs, or things that we don't need, that we convince ourselves that we need, that we truly just want. And those are the things that we convince ourselves are important. But when we take a step back, do we really need that to be happy, or can we be happy in the moment despite the things that we desire? And that's when you know, our desires can become an enemy in that way.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. What we become attached to can
May
be our
rob
suffering.
us from experiencing the joy of the moment by contrasting it to a potentially better moment that doesn't exist.
Absolutely.
Okay, I will move on here to the next of the niyamas, if my device will allow me. So the third niyama is tapas. Tapas can be understood as discipline or fiery determination. Discipline can extend towards physical fitness, meditation, and confronting unhealthy urges. All spiritual pathways require discipline and passion to reach great achievements. So we've already touched on discipline, but what would you like to say about that?
Yeah, tapas is so important also, that people understand that it's not just discipline, it's also that passion, like passionate about. And obviously, if we have not taken a look at some of our previous yamas and niyamas, our passions could be a little bit screwy and taking us off of our dharmic pathway, our life purpose here. But, people will say, well, I have a really hard time meditating. How am I ever going to hope to reach what they call samadhi? I'll say, well, it takes practice. It takes discipline. You're going to have to sit there and struggle through whatever it is that is keeping you from obtaining that goal. Or if you want to have a particular type of physique, it's going to take discipline. You're going to have to get up in the morning and say, okay, what was I going to do again? 50 push-ups, 50 sit-ups, 50 bench presses at 50-pound weight. Check, 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 check. I did it. Same thing on our spiritual path. It takes discipline. Right now, my Guru Ma has me doing 3 hours of meditation a day. That takes discipline. I have to sit down, organize my time, and say, okay, let's see. What's my schedule like? How am I going to fit all of this in? If you want that spiritual or self-actualization, it requires the discipline of going through all the yamas, going through the niyamas, taking care of the physical body, working with the breath, working with all of these different elements. It's not just, a lot of people, I'll tell them, it's not about wearing the fancy yoga pants and wearing the fancy yoga beads. It's not about buying the fancy yoga things, because when all of that is taken away, what do you have left? The work you've put in, the inner work you've put in. The inner work you put in is what you get to take beyond this lifetime. Not the things that you bought, the cute things that, you took to class or put on your altar, but the work you put in. And it helps if we have that passion about it. Like, oh my gosh, I want to do my spiritual practices. I want to get there. I want to go there. I want to do that. Rather than, oh, I gotta meditate now. So we have to have the discipline, but I always say try to have the discipline come in a form of raw passion. Like, I just want this. And then we really move much quicker on our spiritual pathway, rather than, oh, I have to go do my yogasana now. I gotta go do 10 minutes of pranayama. That's nothing. And if it's hard, well, keep practicing, keep practicing. If you go to the gym and you want to lift 100 pounds, but you can only lift 80, don't cry about it. Lift the 80 10 more times. And then maybe by next week, next month, next year, you might be able to lift 100 pounds. And I think that the problem with discipline is we live in a society of instant gratification. I bought it. There it is. Yoga in a package. Ta-da! Spirituality in a package. Ta-da! It looks right. It sounds right. I can take a Snapchat photo and post it. Look at me. I've got my spirituality in a box. But when all the things are taken away, it's the work that's put in and the passion that's there that gets you to it.
Mm-hmm. And it sort of brings to mind, again, something that we were talking about yesterday, and that the end goal of yoga being Samadhi or union or yoking, or this soul integration, or integration of all facets of the self. And that if that is our goal, like in the short term, that the 8 pillars of yoga are setting, are trying to set the yogi up so that they're living their life in such a way that their body and their mind and their actions are preparing them for union with the divine. And so that is experienced on a smaller scale, or in the macrocosm, as the union of Shiva Shakti we were discussing, but I meant to say in the microcosm as Shiva and Shakti, but in the macrocosm, or in the bigger picture, this could be sort of seen as a reflection of the greater dissolution of the soul back into everything, or breaking from the cycles of life and death and samsara. So where I was going with that was that basically the path of yoga is setting us up in one day to create a sort of feedback loop, where we're creating a day-to-day life that encourages us to be more and more drawn towards self-fulfillment and self-actualization and union with the divine, and so that it starts becoming easier. But that those first steps on the path can feel really torturous, depending where you're coming from, or it can feel like it could take 10 lifetimes to strip all of those other aspects away from the self and experience just the pure bliss of existence. And so,
and some people lifetimes.
Yeah, and so everyone is coming to yoga from a different place, but with a sort of the same goal in mind of using this universal formula that you can take and apply to any life, and just use it to enhance said life. And so, was there anything else that you wanted to say on that concept before we move on to Swadhyaya?
Yeah, let's move on to Swadhyaya. Such an important concept.
Okay, so Swadhyaya is the fourth niyama of self-study and study of scriptures. Through study, self-evaluation, and introspection, one forges self-mastery. There's something went awry there. Through study, self-evaluation, and introspection, one forges self-mastery can be attained. There's a little typo there, but we get the point. So
Yes.
Do you want to expand on that there, or maybe just clarify on what was intended to be said there?
Self-mastery is so important. And, you know, when we look at the concept of Swadhyaya, I agree, sure. Read your scriptures, whatever fits within your lineage or your even religious model. But really, at the end of the day, what do we do with it? You know, some people just collect books and they can recite all these different things, but have they applied it to themselves? You know, we've got all the philosophies to help us live a self-actualized life, but we don't get it until we apply it to ourselves. It's like my mom used to joke around and say that my godmother would tease and say, okay, she'd call her up and say, what are you doing right now? And she'd say, I'm watching working out on TV. You know, it's not just enough for us to read about spirituality. It's not just enough to watch and listen about spirituality. You have to do it. And Swadhyaya brings in that concept of really taking the principles that we've studied and studying ourselves. Do I have satya? Am I practicing ahimsa? Am I physically in order? Am I cleanly in thought, body, life? Do I have some serious things that need to be cleared up? Do I need to go to therapy? Do I need to see a psychiatrist? Do I need to speak my truth or have my truth heard? You know, Swadhyaya can also just come in the form of things like journaling. But when we study ourselves, we get to know ourselves. You know, that's a very important concept, know thyself. Because if you don't, everything else sprouts out in a awry way, you know? If you don't know that you're a Brillo patch and you think you're a rose bush, you're still going to get a Brillo patch. If you think you're a dandelion, but you're trying to be an oak tree, you're never going to reach the beautiful manifestation of your dandelion because you're trying to be an oak tree. And along the same thing, we need to know what kind of nutrition does that dandelion need? What kind of lighting does it need? What kind of environment does it need? What type of what type of artha resources are required to reach the dharmic fulfillment of being the most beautiful dandelion? You have to know yourself. If you've got weeds next to you that are draining your nutrients, do the weeding. If there's something else that needs to be done in the process because there's toxins in the system, mental toxins, physical toxins, karmic entanglements, get up in there. And it can be a messy job, self-study. Swadhyaya can be those things that everybody wants to lock in the closet, brush under the rug, avoid, you know, just do the ostrich act on. And I tell them, until you're willing to study yourself and face whatever it is that you need to face, learn whatever it is you need to learn, you're going to keep getting the same results. What's the definition of insanity? Doing the same thing over and over and over, expecting different results. So self-study can be difficult because change can cause fear and anxiety in people. Oh, I'm afraid to change. I'm afraid to change how I act or interact. Well, sometimes I just say, suck it up, get it done, get her done. Or just stay where you are. If you're happy where you are, stay put. But obviously you aren't, or the conversation wouldn't have been had.
Right, that's just it. And as we had discussed before, we were saying that yoga isn't necessarily for everybody, or that it is a tool for deep personal transformation. And for a lot of people, that is the scariest thing they can think of, to look within and face their deepest fears and try to understand and conquer them, and to try to integrate these aspects of themselves or do away with aspects of themselves that aren't benefiting them anymore, or that never were, or these things that need to be brought into light or understood as part of our being, whether they're benefiting us or not. And yoga really, for me, allowed me to look within myself and to sort of decide what aspects of myself were serving me and what aspects were not. And they allow you to sort of separate from things that you previously had thought of as integral to your being almost, or aspects of the self that feel like you've lost control over them, or they become habitual or become just ingrained in your way of living or your way of being. And yoga can allow people to take control of those things again and to start shaping your life into a better version of or to allow you to start shaping your life towards a closer version to what you see as the ideal. But for so many people, they can have this idea in their head of their ideal self, but it can just feel so far away from where they are in the current moment that it's intimidating to make that first step on a path of transformation.
Yeah, and it takes us all the way back to santosha, having that contentment. Be happy where you are right now. It's all right. You know, the self-study might take, what, a day? No. A week? Probably not. A month, a year, a decade, a lifetime, a couple lifetimes even. So just stay on it with that passion of really wanting to be the best version of yourself. It takes time.
And
It really
I find
does.
that even with postures that sometimes I will find I'm pushing too hard to gain more flexibility or to force change in my body, whereas I can benefit more in the moment just from relaxing and breathing and being content with where I'm at in the posture, rather than constantly wishing I had those couple extra inches of flexibility or motion.
Yeah, and Swadhyaya self-study also goes even into the asanas. I'll tell students, okay, so you want to get into some fancy pose. You want to do a scorpion pose. Oh, and you tell me you used to be able to do it 20 years ago. Well, study why you are not able to do it now. What happened? Why is your body no longer the way it was originally intended to be? Flexible, pliable. Oh, because you broke your pelvis? Well, let's take that into consideration. Or because you do a desk job and you're inactive, let's take that into consideration. Or because your diet is dry and cold and the vata in your body is too elevated and causing tissue emaciation, dryness and depletion and atrophy. Well, let's study that. Let's study the physical body and see, what is it? Well, you're not able to come into that pose because you had an emotional trauma that you're holding somewhere in your body and you're clenching to that portion of your body. Study that. Take a look at that. Does it actually hurt to try to come into the pose? Maybe it's just the muscle. Maybe it's your mind. Maybe it's nutritional. Maybe it's fill in the blank. So, even Swadhyaya self-study comes into the asanas, or it even starts moving into the other limbs of breathing. Why are you not able to do the breathing? What is it that's causing this emotional disruption when you're trying to do the breathing? Where'd that come from? When did that start? What pattern created that? Yeah, really important.
So we have one Niyama left, and then we'll be moving on to the other limbs of yoga. But first, so Ishwara Pranidhana, the fifth observance, incorporates making each action an offering to divinity, developing trust and alignment with the universe. Is there anything you'd like to say about that?
Oh, yeah. Ishvara Pranadhana is often defined as surrender. And I used to joke around and say, I'm the worst at that. I'm not one to surrender, not easily or gracefully. And I would say to myself, well, what's this surrender mean? Do I have to submit? Because I'm not going to submit. And then I started realizing it's surrendering to the now. There's a lot of different layers to it. Surrendering and saying like this, okay, this is what we've got going on right now. It doesn't mean give up, like I surrender. It means see things for what it is right now. All right, this is how it is. It is what it is. Now, what do I make with this lemon? What do I make with this spilt milk on the floor? What do I do about it? But when we start taking the concept of surrender to deeper layers, we also understand that when we come into farther levels of yoking, when we are accessing or radiating out more of our soul and less of our monkey mind and mental conditioning, societal conditioning, school conditioning, eventually we kind of have to start considering that what we've been told we should do, what we have thought was the path to take, may not be our soul's pathway. And your soul's pathway may rub people wrong. You may have to relinquish certain relationships. You may have to relinquish certain societal standings or positions in society to reach your soul's mission. And that takes surrender. You know, I recently received a spiritual name through my Guru Ma. And in many ways, it's a surrender to that new vibrational existence of soul actualization. And I can't just sit here and say, well, this is my identity. This is who I am. This is what I'm going to cling to. Sometimes you really have to take that leap of faith and surrender into the flow of divinity. And it might not be what you expect because it's not what you were told. It's not the episode of Little House on the Prairie that you were hoping for. It might not be the, sitcom model of what you were thinking was going to happen, that you attached your mind to once upon a time. You may have to relinquish that and surrender to a whole new outlet of the river and just say, all right, have I studied myself well enough? Is this the right path? Am I being truthful with myself? Am I being cleanly in my actions, thoughts, and mind? Am I on the right path? And if you are, one of the best things you can do is surrender to it. But it's kind of scary sometimes. Spiritual life can look really off the wall to some people. Really off the wall. People are like, what's going on with this person? Their opinion's not my business. Doesn't matter.
Great. Yeah. There, you ended the section on the Niyamas with a quote, and I'll read it here. Anyone calling out for God from any land, in any language, and in any age, remember, their cries reach this heart like the waves of the ocean crashing onto the shore. And that is a quote from Sri Anandamayima. Didn't even say what was that quote.
That's a really important concept that I often think about. And a friend sent it to me recently and reminded me of it, that what's our soul's purpose here? Are we yoking? Are we crying out to reach God? And when we do, those cries are heard. And it's like a crashing union at that time. And we also want to be prepared for that moment when our cries are heard. We want to be truthful about who we are. We want to really have studied ourselves and say, yes, this is what my soul is yearning for in this lifetime. This is my life mission. This is my dharma. These are my karmas. This is what I'm going to do, even if it doesn't quite look right to other people.
And that can be a really empowering place to come to for anyone, where you come to a point of realizing that your own dharma, despite what it may look like to others, or despite how other people may perceive it, it is important for you to embrace your own personal dharma or swadharma. And and not everyone is going to understand that, and that's okay. And particularly for people on a spiritual path, or in the Western world particularly, there can be a lot of sort of judgment and a lot of things that are assumed, or a lot of stigma about someone on a spiritual path, that they're maybe lazy, or that they have a couple screws loose or something, almost, that they aren't as oriented in the material world and the same sort of aspirations that your typical modern day Western person holds dear. And
Or that you've gone mad.
pardon me?
Or that you've gone mad.
Yeah, precisely. Or that would be a bad thing if it were true. No, but absolutely. I think that we've covered a lot of ground just between the Yamas and the Niyamas. We're approaching almost the 2-hour mark. So perhaps this would be a good time to just take a minute, and I will stop the recording just to make sure that we don't lose an incredible amount of time here. Just to make sure that the video renders properly, and then I can splice the two of them together in a little bit.
All right, or you can even have 2 sections.
Yeah, if it were not for the fact that I were getting all of my bottom teeth pulled tomorrow, I would say that we could just make part 2 a little later, but it would be quite a bit later. So,
well, let's go ahead and jump in and do it. All right, so I'll see you after the intermission.
Okay, I'm just going to take a couple minutes, and I will, I guess, send you another link. Will I have to send you another link after?
You can just hop back on this one.
So it will let me like render the video, you think? Or it will let me convert the video and then hop back on and start recording again, I guess.
It should.
Okay, well, let's hope for the best, and I will talk to you in a moment.
Okay.